All right, John Gilmartin, welcome to the Fireside PM podcast. How are you today, John?
Tom, I'm doing great. It's thanks for having me on. It's fun. I always have a good time chatting with you.
Yes, and I mean, you and I know each other from graduate school, but why don't you start by introducing yourself so people can get to know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently a general manager at VMware. I've been at VMware for a number of years. Kind of rose up through the ranks, both from the product marketing and product management side. But as I progressed through my career, taking on more general management responsibilities. So that includes building products and then thinking about how to take those products into the marketplace. And been in the enterprise space, selling to IT organizations most of my career.
Wow, you are a glutton for punishment. Um, why don't we start with like how did you get there? Like, what did you study in school, and how did you end up in kind of on this path?
So going way back, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
So I started in school, undergrad. I was computer science. So I've always had a bit of a technical bent, and love technology, and I've always loved technology. Went in a different direction after that. I actually went into consulting, like a lot of undergrads do. I did strategy consulting for a few years, and that sort of gave me a little bit of a view into, I guess the business world, if you will,
Hmm.
and is what then motivated me to go to business school, where you and I met, and sort of round out a bit more and get a kind of a broader perspective on what are the opportunities that there were. And so coming out of business school, that's when I really looked at how do I connect these two things together, the technology and business. And that's where I jumped into, actually my first job out of business school was at Dell. And at Dell, I spent time really looking at that's where I got into the enterprise space, looking at selling technology. That time more on the marketing side, focused on working with sales teams and customers directly and looking at how we bring products to market, how we position them, how we build the right kind of efforts to go grow businesses and track them, et cetera, which is really fascinating. Gave me a lot of insight into how sales works, which is a pretty interesting thing and important thing. And then from there, I actually moved into more product marketing at VMware. From there into product management and spent a number of years running product management teams, and then more into the general management space after that.
So CS undergrad and MBA is a very common recipe for a PM job out of business school. And you went into marketing. Was that an intentional decision, or was it just like, hey, this was the most interesting opportunity and the timing was right? Or how did you start in marketing?
Yeah, actually, funny enough, I actually started more on operations at
Mm,
Dell. I did that for a little while, working actually in more how think about manufacturing strategy at the company, and just sort of tied into a bit of some of the work I did in undergrad, which related to computer science around operations research and management. But I did that for a little while, and it was sort of doing that I realized it wasn't quite the right thing,
hmm
and that's where I found an opportunity inside Dell to work on marketing, which was more of an opportunity, both from a product standpoint and but also then from a more of a business standpoint, to see how does this actually work? How do you actually bring a product to market? And that's what I was really interested in. Right? Was like, how does, because it's sort of a mystery to me, frankly, at that age and at that time. How do you actually, frankly, how does selling work? Right? How does marketing work?
mm.
And it was a great learning experience, and it's one that stuck with me. Even as I moved more back into kind of product development and product management, really having some intuition and understanding of how hard it is to sell, what a difficult job that is, and how important it is as you're thinking about products and positioning and messaging and pricing, all those things. How important it is to get those right, to support sales teams to be able to easily and simply articulate that to a customer, and to make it effective, right? So that you actually can go drive a business growth.
It's so interesting in that a lot of PMs and sort of product development people, I think we're always focused on building the best product
Yes,
possible. And then and then marketing happens.
you throw it over the wall, and you figure out how to go sell it because it's so great. It's just going to sell itself.
Right. It's like, and if it doesn't do well, it must be some marketing's fault. But
Marketing
if it does,
fault,
yeah,
exactly.
if it does well, of course, it's an amazing product.
Yeah.
Now, you having spent, in a way, like cut your teeth in marketing before going to product development, do you think that changed how you thought about product management and when you made that switch?
It did quite a bit. And in particular, for me, I think a lot about this word positioning,
Mm,
right? Which is, for me, it's sort of the coming together of product development and marketing, which is, this question of, what exactly is your product? Who is it really for? What problem are you solving for them? And, how are you different than all the alternatives that, the customer is currently thinking about? And I think we don't spend enough time articulating that positioning in a succinct way. We just think what we're building is great. Yet we're not always
mm,
thinking about, well, how's the customer solving that now, and
mm,
how is what we're doing now actually really better than what they're doing? Because that's what the sales teams and the marketing teams have to face every day. Is they have to go and have that conversation, and they have to go in a very simple way, elevator pitch kind of way, be able to articulate that positioning, and then be able to support it, right? And so as you think about building a product, how is your roadmap supporting that positioning, right? How is your, all the work you're doing? Because it's very easy to get the shiny object and go work on this cool feature or this cool new thing.
mhm,
But those things don't always support your core positioning. It's not, is it really reinforcing your core advantage? Is it really reinforcing what your target customer is really trying to go solve? Or is it just interesting you know, for other kinds of customers, or is it not really differentiating because it's kind of too similar to what other people are doing?
when I hear you say that now, it sounds eminently logical and reasonable. And yet, I think we've all seen many companies forget that,
Yeah.
and they fall in love with the technology or the product or the feature. Why do you think we keep learning that lesson over and over again?
Well, it's easy, and I see it, right. Well, one is, especially as you become, well, I think there's a couple of things. One is there's the big company side of that question, and there's sort of like the small company startup side of that question. As a bigger company, the risk is that you start to separate. You typically organize somewhat functionally. You sort of have a big sales and marketing organization on one side, a big product development organization on the other side. And I think too often the product teams, they start to get a little bit disconnected from the customer, frankly,
Mm,
right? And disconnected from the sales teams and disconnected from kind of other sides of the business. And as you said, they start to fall in love with just trying to solve a technology problem or solve their perception of what a customer problem is. But again, they're too far removed, And I remember taking this one product management course. Actually, I was talking about it to someone today, and they had this phrase which I thought was so smart around, for a product manager, it was nothing important happens in the office. Which, especially in the enterprise space, means you need to get out of the office. You need to
mm.
be spending all your time really understanding what customers are doing and what they're facing, and really build that sort of intuition and connection with the customer, and not spend all your time with the engineering teams. It's boring. You got to have that relationship. You can't spend all your time with the engineering teams just managing the backlog and managing kind of the engineering process. You need to be out there really kind of spending every day really learning and understanding what's happening with the customer.
And that requires some intentional commitment of resources and time.
Ton.
Because
Yeah.
like if you're the PM of a consumer product, like you have the benefit of using, your product all the time, or if it's like a small business product, you can play around with it all the time. Or if you're building products for complex enterprises, like you really do need to get out there. And I'm curious, like, how do you get access, and how have you seen that work out well, where you make the most out of getting out of the building and spending time with those customers?
Yeah. So, if you think about the individual PM, I mean, a key thing they need to do is frankly build relationships first with salespeople, or typically you have pre-sales engineers, SEs. You need to make them your best friends, right? And because especially the SEs tend to have tremendous insight and good relationships with the users of your product. So, and use them to go get in, meet users, build relationships. As I said, get out of the office. Post COVID, hopefully you can do that more. But get out of the office and get face to face. you also need to understand that enterprise, it's not just about the user, right? It's, typically a buying, if you think about the decision-making unit, the buyer, you have a user, you've got typically a user, a budget owner who's not the user, right? But they're an important decision maker. Then you have related constituents like security teams or compliance teams. And so part of the your job as a PM is actually to understand that entire decision-making process. How does a company make a decision to buy product X versus product Y? And it's not strictly just because you have a better feature or a better user experience. Those are required, but they're not sufficient. You also have to think about all these other constituents and stakeholders, what they care about, and you better build some really understanding of that deeply as well.
And how do you get access to those decision makers when they might think of you as, well, you're kind of on the other side of a negotiating table? Do you find that the customers and decision makers are open to letting the PMs kind of spend a lot of time with them, or how does that work?
In the enterprise space, absolutely, right? Because the thing that customers want to do is they want to have influence, right? And they want to help guide the roadmap. So they'll invite you in, and it's just a question of putting the time in the outreach. And and I've seen the most successful products and PMs, the ones who really think about developing a set of trusted customers and actually treat them as design partners early in the process, and constantly go back to them with mock-ups and constantly get them to, once you're ready to actually put early versions out, get them to use it, and even pre-beta alpha type things. That's where you really learn so much so quickly. Is actually people, it's not enough just to explain a concept or show a slide. It's just you have to get that very hands-on experience for set of customers, and they want to do it. And then the other kinds of things you do as you get more mature is start to build customer councils, right? There's plenty of people who want to be regularly involved and be advised. And so you just have a regular cadence and get a group of 10, 15 customers and get in there and show concepts, roadmaps, get feedback. And it's good to have that kind of mix of both the one-on-one, but also customers they'll play off each other in some of these group discussions. And it's good to hear sort of that the interaction actually between them as they talk about not just your product, but also the problems they're solving, the other things they're considering. And you're going to get better sense for what the market landscape is at the same time.
Well, let's go back to your career path. You made this transition from marketing to product. What stimulated that? Or did you just sort of take on product and hold on to marketing as well? Or did you actually move over to a different kind of job ladder?
Yeah, so actually, very specifically, what happened was I left VMware to go to a startup, and I went there to run marketing at the startup, and I ran marketing, so all the outbound, everything outbound, which another kind of amazing learning experience. But part of what I learned was I didn't feel like I had enough influence on the product side. And I wanted more influence on the product side because felt like some of the decisions I would move in a different direction. And it just so happened that VMware had a need in the same market space that I was. They were just entering into the storage space, and they had a need. So I had that opportunity to go back to VMware in product management, running that team as VMware was just getting into launching the first product around storage. And so that became a very fortuitous opportunity for me. And part of it was because the company knew me, and so they knew what I was capable of, and kind of like what I was good at, etc. And so they gave me that opportunity to go take on product management, to go build a product, to go take a new product into the market, and then from there, I loved it, right? I loved being on the product side and driving the roadmap and driving the direction, and so. From there, just continued down that path and just kind of expanded my skills and the opportunities there.
How was that transition going from, because at that point you had years in marketing.
Yeah.
Switching over.
Well, I mean, one is the good thing of being at a startup is that I was, even though I couldn't make the decisions, I was very tied in with the product. and got very deep into the storage industry and storage space and understanding kind of the kind of choices we had to make. I spent a lot of time actually with the engineering team there and with the product team and the product management team. So that actually gave me a good opportunity to kind of kind of see kind of what was working, what was not in that process. And then moving into that in VMware, there's quite a bit I had to learn, especially because you build a certain intuition as a product marketer around, you understand the product deeply, but you focus more on the messaging and I did a lot of pricing and a lot of things. But on the product management side, a lot more on because working with engineering can be very different, right, than working directly with sales and customers. And so that was probably one of the biggest learning experiences, was not just the process of driving decision making, which I felt like I was pretty good at from experience, but doing that in a way that was going to be effective with a bunch of very, very smart and also very, very opinionated engineers, who understood the technology much more deeply than I could. And so finding that right relationship where I brought value from a customer and customer standpoint, and use that to complement what they had, which is a much, much deeper understanding of what was possible and the trade-offs and the choices that we had to make from an architecture and a capability standpoint.
Well, you've touched on one of my favorite topics, which is PM engineering relations and partnership and the dynamic between the two functions. You talked about they bring a ton of, they're super smart. They know the technology inside and out. Could you share an example or some lessons learned along the way on how you were able to find effective partnerships with your engineering counterparts, and maybe things that you thought would work that didn't work as well, and then things that you've learned that work well in the long run?
Yeah, that's a good question. I got to think a little bit. It's first of all, I think it always comes down to so much is about relationships, right? And building relationships where you understand what's important, right? As I think about a variety of engineers that I've worked with over time, they often come from even they themselves have different ideas of what's important, right, or what they care about or what they're looking for from a PM, or what they're passionate about. And I think building rapport is about understanding their perspective, and that takes time, and it takes asking questions and getting to know them as individuals and as people, right? And I think that's a foundational level of building trust that you need to do in any relationship, regardless whether engineering or any kind of relationship. So one is you need a foundation of trust, and then it's really then like spending time to understand and align on like what are we trying to go do, right? And make sure you have alignment around what is the objective, and then make sure that you're being really clear on roles and responsibilities, essentially around what are you going to do as a PM to go help drive and achieve that, versus what is an engineer? Because there's not always a clean straight line, right? It's not always you do this, I do that. It's a partnership, right? And as any kind of partnership, you need to define the terms of that partnership and spend time to saying who does what, right? And who's going to make what decisions, or who's going to own doing what kind of action. And then when you commit to doing things, then it's, as with any relationship of trust, it's you better go deliver. And as a PM, that means you better really bring in good market understanding. You better really bring in good customer understanding, and you really better help bring in a perspective and set of information and data that the engineers themselves can't go get when they're and they, because they have a lot of hunger for that. They want to understand things, and they're really looking for you. The other thing that I think is super effective, though, is like a tactics is in the enterprise space. Not everybody does this. Is when you go do those customer meetings, bringing your engineering leaders and especially your technical leaders with you in those meetings, right? Getting them engaged, helping them understand those customer pains in a more intuitive way. I remember one product we were building, which was one of the real problems we were having was the ongoing lifecycle management problem. Like, how do I upgrade this thing, and how do I maintain it, especially in a complex IT data center environment? These are actually really hard problems. And actually bringing one of our engineers to the customer site, into their data center, working with that customer to actually go through an upgrade process, they came back with such a different perspective on what the customer pain was, and suddenly realized how much more work we had to do as an engineering team, as a product team, to go solve this. And that doing, the kind of approaches we were taking, which we thought were good enough, and and the engineers were like, yeah, it's good enough. We're not anywhere addressing the kind of real pain that customers had as they dealt with all the other pieces of infrastructure beyond just what our product is. And maybe that's another insight, which is, so often our thinking ends at the product, our product, and we kind of draw this little boundary around what are we doing. Especially in enterprise space, you are touching so many other things, and you're living in an ecosystem, and the customer is using your product in the context of all these other products. And so if you really want to understand the customer user experience, you need to understand that dynamic as well. And so, bringing your engineers into actually seeing that and living that, hugely beneficial in getting alignment around what is really important, what is the priority, right? Because at the end of the day, I think that's what you're trying to get to as a PM and an engineer, is like, let's agree on what the priorities are and agree what we should go work on. And when there's a million things we could do, how do you pick the 2 or 3 that are really going to move the needle?
Let's get a little tactical around product management kind of deliverables. One common one that comes up a lot is like the roadmap. And I'm curious, we've all seen a lot of roadmaps over the years. Like what makes for a very successful roadmap, and what's the PM's role in making that happen, in your view?
Well, PM owns the roadmap, so their job is I view that as a core part of their job. They better be delivering a roadmap, and they'll work with engineering and other teams to go kind of build it out. But that is a foundational deliverable. I can tell you what makes a poor roadmap, right? And
yeah, let's go that way.
Yeah, very often, you see roadmaps that are just lists of features. And it's like, here's, Q1, Q2, Q3, here's 5 different features, here's 5 more features. And individually, these, like, fine, that's a feature, but I don't have any sense of what the theme is here, or how these things hang together, or what it actually does. Effective roadmaps, obviously, really turn it around and focus on, what is a meaningful piece of customer value that we're going to go deliver. And ideally have a theme of how that customer value evolves over time. And here are the different, maybe the feature or the capabilities and that we're going to deliver to go enhance that, but really fitting under a theme of, how we're going to go do a better job around, I don't know, reducing, improving storage efficiency, right? As a theme, or how we're going to reduce the total cost of storage, right? And here's all the things we're going to go and do to go do that. And if you can put it in that context, it'd be much easier for customers to both understand what you're doing, but also then be able to give you meaningful feedback of, is that addressing the kinds of things that they're trying to accomplish. And that actually fits into our earlier conversation of positioning, right? Because you need to start being able to articulate, especially in enterprise, like how do these things impact my TCO? How do these things impact my security? How do these impact, other kind of things I'm trying to go solve as a customer? And so the PM's job is really to make sure that you're able to map, a piece of work or a technology into what that customer outcome is going to be.
Let's talk about another PM artifact, which is requirements documents.
Yes.
What's your maybe we'll use your framework. What makes a bad PRT?
The bad PR, is when you just see a list of requirements. It's like do X, Y, Z, right? That's a bad requirements document. Good requirements document is rooted in use cases, customer stories, right? And really defining, going back to that question of what is the customer trying to solve, and then mapping that to the requirements, right? And so, I've seen product requirement documents are basically just a list of features. And again, how do you interpret that? How do you figure out what's important in that? How do you be creative around thinking about different ways to go solve the problem? As opposed, and a good one is, which communicates well to engineering, is here's the user story. Users trying to do this. They're trying to go solve this problem. Therefore, these are the kinds of things that they need in order to go solve that problem.
Love it. Let me ask you one more, and then we're going to shift gears and talk about your transition to general management.
Yes.
When a PM wants to pitch a new idea that's not on the official roadmap, or it's a new market or a new angle, how do they do that well in your eyes, or what's what's the bad way to do it?
Good way to do it is, well, I think, as you think about new market, and it's always the question, it's a hard one, right? How do you think about, entering new markets?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the question you're asking, I think. And you have to, do you think about it like a venture capitalist? Like, should we be investing in that space a little bit? And so you start to ask questions like, is it a big market? Is it a growing market? What's changing in the market that makes it an interesting time to enter now? Obviously a lot of other questions you can ask, but you also have to, think about from a company standpoint, what makes us actually, relevant, or, what capability are we bringing that's unique, that we, whether it be Google or VMware or whoever, it can actually go do something interesting, unique, incredible in this space, right? So it's, there's the market trends. Are you actually lining up against something that's from a technology trend that's going to change things, so that entry is an opportunity to kind of disrupt or intercept something new? From a company standpoint, do you actually have unique capabilities, or are you basically competing like any startup from scratch? And so, what do you bring to bear? From always back to that, customer problem of like, what job are you doing for the customer? That you gotta be able to articulate that really well. And then you got to get back to the competition, and like, why what you're proposing is going to be any different than what the customer can already do today, or what other vendors are already providing. Yeah, I remember, the person I used to work for used to talk about, it's sort of a Venn diagram, right? As you think about a new product, is a Venn diagram of, one circle is the customer needs, another circle is your capabilities, and the other circle is like the competition.
Mm-hmm.
They all overlap, and your job is really to find that intersecting point where your capabilities plus the customer need and the weaknesses of your competitor all are kind of at the same place, and you really kind of shoot your arrow right through that hole. And that's how you win and kind of build a new, interesting product.
Super awesome. I'm gonna have to make a clip of that for my LinkedIn post. Tell me a little bit about talent acquisition and retention. Like, how do you view building and growing a great PM team?
So it's well, first of all, like any team these days, and as a leader, one thing I've sort of learned over time is you have to be, well, I've always, think of the team as, the team is smarter than the individual, right? And so you really think about how do you build a team that complements each other, and find a way to get so that they're working together in an additive way, as opposed to a set of individuals who are all doing those things. And so that means you have to build a team that has complementary skills, and you want to be careful of just having one idea of what a PM is and just hiring 10 of the same profile and ending up with 10 of the same things who then don't really kind of really mesh in a way to make the team better. And so different so you want to look for different profiles. So the kind of some PMs are deeply technical, right? And so you do need some people who are, and especially enterprise, you need people who are deeply technical and understand very deeply how technology works, the trends, big trends in technology, and just love understanding kind of all the ones and zeros. And then you need people who come, I've always had like to have some people who've come from like technical sales type roles, because they can complement really well from a deeper understanding of how people actually use the product, right? Which is hard, especially in the enterprise. Like you said, in consumer, as a PM, you use your own product every single day. But in the enterprise, you're not a user. And you need to make sure that you have people who really can build intuition about kind of using and what the user is going to be doing. And frankly, sometimes we even hire customers to become PMs here and there, because they often, a lot of our customers are very technical, and they have a real passion for building experiences and solving and the kind of problems that they solve or that they've experienced, and they want to go solve those. So for me, it's like, how do you find that the mix of people? And so we've anywhere from many engineers making the move into PM to people from the sales. If you can find the right mix of that, then you can really have a powerful team.
And let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of evaluating talent. Do you use the traditional interview process? Like, how do you, in that short window of time, figure out who's going to be a good PM and successful PM on your team?
Yeah, well, now you're getting to like philosophies around interviewing, right? And
Yeah.
what actually works. And I guess I look at the research that basically says it's interviews are not great predictors in general of performance, right? But it's unfortunately it's the best we have. Though I think really combining that with um, references, I think that's understanding what people have accomplished becomes a super important part of deciding if someone's going to be a good fit for a role. So references are critical. And in the interviewing, I believe in less on the hypotheticals, right? I don't think the hypothetical interviews really, that more tells you whether someone's good at interviewing, not whether they're good at a job. And so, spending more time really understanding what they've done, asking questions about and seeing what depth of kind of thinking they have on products they've brought to market, choices they've made, how they've driven led trade-offs and trade-off thinking, how they've worked with engineering, how they solve problems and work with engineering. Those then become, I think, the interesting ways to interview and understand. Does this person actually know how to act as a PM? Have they done it before? I guess that's it's that experiential kind of interview that tends to be the best in my experience.
Yeah. We could spend a lot of time talking about the interview process, but I do want to also touch, before we run out of time, on your transition from leading product to being a general manager. Was that part of the plan all along? Like, how did you manage that transition, and what do you think of it? Like, what are the pros and cons of PMs that want to make that leap as well?
Yeah, for me, it was opportunistic. It was more an opportunity came along, not by design. It wasn't anything I was going after specifically. In fact, in the early, when I first joined VMware, there wasn't really the concept of a GM, and so it's more during the company sort of started to reorganize a bit more around product lines. The GM role emerged, and there was an opportunity to really think about that came on for me, which was starting up something new. So it was a very small engineering team, and it was a small product team, small product marketing team, and so more of an opportunity. I was very passionate about trying to go solve this problem, and so I kind of got the opportunity to go work with those teams and turn it into a team essentially, and then go build something from scratch, and actually act very much like a startup inside of VMware, doing all the things you do as a startup, like how do you find product market fit. We had to pivot a couple times as we realized we didn't quite have it right. And then we had to figure out, once we had product market fit, how do we go scale, out through, in this case, the VMware sales team, as opposed to building our own. But, a lot of what the GM job for me became was thinking very end to end, sort of like a product manager should, but even a bit more. But I think every product manager should be thinking about themselves as the owner or the GM of a business, and think about everything from what does it mean to even get a customer interested in your product, to how they're going to buy it, to how they can use it, to how you're going to support it, to on that entire end-to-end stream, and then making sure that you're not just building the things, as we talked about earlier, to go and make that build that product and build the features and capabilities, but also having the leadership and influence across the rest of the company to make sure you're lining up every other aspect of the product lifecycle to be successful. Because the product experience for the customers, again, more than the product, it's every interaction they have with the company. And I think as a GM, you have to be thinking about every aspect and every kind of touch point, every contact, and making sure that you're solving problems, because there's problems everywhere through that chain, and your job is to go identify those and not let them linger.
What was it like taking your hands off the product management steering wheel, as it were? Was it hard, or are you still kind of acting at a PM, or how does that work?
I think I think it depends on the person. I think some people find it very hard. Yeah, and I've seen some people go through that transition because they're just so used to they're used to, they're used to making those decisions, and it's hard to,
Mhm.
then trust somebody else to go do it. But if you're going to make that transition, I think you have to, every time you, just like when you go from an individual contributor to becoming a manager, you can no longer act like an individual contributor. But a lot of first-time managers make that mistake, right?
Mhm.
And often they get promoted because they're a really good individual contributor, right? They're really good at it. But you have, when you're a manager, you have to just, your roles and responsibilities and what you have to do for your team are very different than that individual PM. And the same when you make the move from, running a function to running multiple functions, you have a responsibility to set up your PM leader for success, right? And that means, you got to give them the space to make their decisions. You've got to, hold them accountable. You've got to, ask a lot of questions and ask tough questions, and make sure they're thinking things through end to end. But ultimately, it actually reminds me. I think it was the CEO of Cisco made a comment when he hired, a senior leader in his team, and it came to decision making. He says, "You have 51% of the vote, and I have 49%. But so ultimately, I'll trust you, but make sure you convince me at the same time."
Yeah, good advice. Let's now touch a little bit about kind of career advice in general. Actually, before we go into kind of broader career advice for PMs out there, you mentioned some early pivots,
Yes.
and I'm curious. Like, I think when you have market fit, like it, but sometimes when you don't have market fit, it's not obvious
Yeah.
because you can come up with all kinds of reasons why. Well, it's not the right customer, or the timing was off, or we just need this one more feature.
Yeah.
How did you think about when it was time to pivot versus just keep pushing forward on the roadmap that you have?
Well, it's super hard because it's when we did have customers, right? We did have customers who liked
Mm,
what we had put together, and
yeah.
what we had to decide was, are there enough of these kind of customers? And so ultimately we decided there weren't, and so that's why we had to pivot. And that's a super hard decision because partly not only are you, there's a lot of uncertainty in that claim or assertion, and so you do your best to answer that, but you're dealing with, with imperfect information. But also when you do that, you're going to be disappointing some of the customers that you've already been serving, and we
Mhm.
did, right? We had a solution which, was doing a lot of kind of end-to-end automation across software and hardware, and doing all kind of, a lot of interesting things in that area. And there was a set of customers where that's what they wanted, right? And they wanted us to do that whole thing end to end. But as we spent time with many, many other customers, they had other ways of solving big pieces of that, and or what we were doing wasn't going to work for them, and they were never going to buy if that's what we kept doing. And so we had to go segment our solution a bit more, narrow it in onto, more of a subset of the problem, and that allowed us to go expand out pretty dramatically. But those first set of customers, they, we essentially had to say goodbye to many of them as we, pivoted on to a bigger set, and that was a hard decision. And we spent a lot of time internally as a team, because as you might imagine, there were plenty of people who were pretty invested, not only in,
Yeah,
those customers, but also in the technology and in the
sure.
choices and the things we built. And we had
Yeah.
to actually throw away some things we had built that we weren't going to use anymore. And so there's a lot of emotion that gets tied up in that, and a lot of like, hey, I built that, and what do you mean we're not going to keep using it anymore? And so we had to go through a pretty, you know, I think, I've learned a lot about decision making over the years, right? And I, very simple model that I like. I think it's a Bain model, and but it's basically you separate your decision into your facts and your alternatives, right? And you focus first as a team. Let's not debate what the right answer is. We're not this is not time for debate. Let's just try and think creatively about what are our choices based on what
Mhm.
we know. Do we agree on what we know? Do we agree on, the conditions right now? And can we think really broadly and open-minded and art of possible about ways we could go solve, the issue we have around growth, right? We're not growing right now. It's not fast enough. We're not getting enough customers. What are all the things we could go do? And invite everybody into that, right? Invite all the engineers who really feel passionate. Invite, folks from the field who feel passionate, and get a lot of opinions and points of view. And you talk about inclusivity, right? We talk about that a lot these days. That's really what inclusion is. Also, is getting people to be able to feel like they're part of the process and part of the decision. So you spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then later, after you do that, then you come to the decision meeting. And then that's where you have the rough and tumble debate. And okay, which one of these things are we actually going to choose? And we have to make a decision. And yeah, of course, some people will be disappointed, but at least they got to be heard. And at least they got to, feel like, people understood their point of view. And yes, we made a decision the other way, but at least we all now can buy into that decision, and we can go forward and move in our pivot and go into this new direction.
Great advice, John. Let's wrap it up with career advice. Maybe you could share some great career advice you've received along the way that you've, ended up passing on to other people as well. Like any key kind of insights about how you've made your own career decisions over the years that you could share?
Well, I think I don't have any I don't think I have any special wisdom on this, but I'll share how I've thought about it as I've gone through. First, I think one of the most important things, and again, it's obvious, is you got to work on things that you enjoy and you're passionate about and that you have fun doing, because then you do a good job just because it's fun to go do, right? And you excel because of that. So, first, that's sort of baseline.
Yeah.
But then as you go through and you sort of think about what are opportunities, and what's this new opportunity came up, should I go take it? I mean, I have a very simple framework that I use for myself is, one is, if I go do this new thing, can I make a contribution? Do I really feel like I can go have an impact and really make a difference in the mission or what we're trying to go accomplish? And then two, for me, what kind of options does this open up? What am I going to learn from this opportunity, and how's it going to change? What kind of things I can do afterwards, as I think about something beyond it. And so I haven't spent my career plotting out, I need to do this, I need to do that, and do that and that. But every step of the way, I think about, does this opportunity open up more options for me, and will it then give me choices in the future beyond the set of choices that I have today?
John, amazing advice. I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it. And if you're watching this on replay and you think it's useful, don't forget to like and share. And thank you, John. Thank you for spending 40 minutes of your busy schedule with me on the Fireside PM podcast. I hope we can continue the conversation in the near future.
Yeah, it's fantastic, Tom. I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Well, awesome. I will see you soon.
See you soon. Thanks.
Bye.